BBC News, hello, I'm Gareth Barlow. President Biden says a US drone strike has killed the al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri. He said he authorized the operation, which took place in the Afghan capital Kabul on Saturday.
I authorized a precision strike that would remove him from the battlefield once and for all. This mission was carefully planned, rigorously minimized the risk of harm to other civilians. And 1 week ago, after being advised that the conditions were optimal, I gave the final approval to go get him.
Mr. Biden said Ayman al-Zawahiri was Osama bin Laden's number 2 and had been deeply involved in the September the 11th attacks on the United States in 2001, which killed nearly 3,000 people. Hours before President Biden's announcement, a Taliban spokesman acknowledged there had been a US drone strike on Kabul, but made no mention of Ayman al-Zawahiri. He condemned the strike, calling it a violation of international principles. Secunda Kamani is in Kabul.
This killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri really does get to the crux of the tense relationship that there's always been between the Taliban and the United States, and that's because al-Qaeda had its haven here in Afghanistan. They used Afghanistan as a base from which to plot the 9/11 attacks. And before American troops were withdrawn from Afghanistan last year, the Taliban and America signed a deal. And as part of that deal, the Taliban committed to not allowing foreign militant groups to use Afghan soil to plot attacks abroad or on the West.
An international study says that the risks of a climate change catastrophe, including the extinction of the human race, are not being taken seriously by scientists. The authors say that the consequences of warming beyond 3 degrees Celsius have been dangerously underexplored. Our environment correspondent Matt McGrath has more details.
This new study suggests that there are catastrophic risks even at modest levels of climate change that are poorly understood by science. As well as floods and heat waves, there are likely to be compounding effects on food supplies, conflict and disease that significantly amplify the threat from rising temperatures. The international team of authors say there's also been relatively little research on the potential for global warming of 3 degrees and beyond. In that scenario, around 2 billion people would be living with extreme heat by 2070 in some of the most politically fragile and densely populated parts of the world.
Media in the US and Taiwan say the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi plans to visit the island later on Tuesday. There's been no official confirmation from Ms. Pelosi, who's on a tour of Asia. China's envoy to the United Nations says such a visit to Taiwan, which it considers to be part of its own territory, would undermine relations between the two countries, and it said would be provocative. You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC. A member of a militia group from Texas who tried to storm the US Capitol armed with a gun has been sentenced to more than 7 years in prison. Guy Reffitt was also convicted of threatening to harm his teenage children, who turned him in to the FBI. Mr. Reffitt was the first defendant of the January 6th riot to go on trial. His wife, Nicole, warned others that it could happen to them.
We allow our country to keep being driven into the ground by the corrupt, evil politicians here in this city, then one day at your kitchen table, FBI is going to come in and tell you that you stood up at the school board meeting and you are now a domestic terrorist. So wake up, America. This isn't just about Guy Wesley Reffitt. This isn't about just 1-6. This is about our liberties being stomped on.
The Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has expropriated about 100,000 hectares of land to move forward construction of a multi-billion-dollar railway project known as the Mayan Train. The 1,500-kilometre line is already under construction in the Yucatan Peninsula with the aim of linking tourist zones. The Mexican president declared it a matter of national security at the end of July after several legal injunctions put its future in doubt. The Palestinian Health Ministry says a Palestinian has been shot dead by the Israeli army in the north of the occupied West Bank. He was reported to have been killed during clashes between Israeli forces and Palestinians in the Jenin refugee camp. And surgeons have used virtual reality headsets to help successfully separate Brazilian twins born with fused brains. Doctors in Brazil and Britain wore the technology to test techniques before then operating on the 3-year-olds. The final procedure was carried out in Rio de Janeiro. It took more than 27 hours to complete and almost 100 medical staff. The twins are said to be recovering well. That's the latest BBC News.